So I think there was a big piece of news that broke last week, and a couple of things have come to my attention that are pretty close in relation to the same issues that caused that. So a big piece of news recently was that Birmingham City Council has had to declare bankruptcy. They lost a bunch of lawsuits, but they were running out of money already, essentially. This has happened in a couple of other councils around the country as well, both Labour and Conservative. And this is another result of the poison of Conservative austerity, in that it has starved councils of funding, and they can't just put up council tax forever. So lots of places not just are becoming bankrupt, but also in general are just running out of a lot of money. And I've got a couple of stories about this, which just shows just how damaging Conservative austerity has been for your local areas and your local council and the local ownership of those council resources as well. So this is the first story that I've got here, and it's that broke councils are cancelling green projects that would lower energy bills for households. So not only is it taking away money from your local authority budgets to be able to have the infrastructure available for you, they also are having to cancel projects that would actually lower your bills. Your bills are going to be much higher. Your cost of living is going to be increased because funding to your local authorities, who are a really important part of your economic life, has been absolutely cut to the bone by the Conservative Party. Cash-strapped councils are being forced to scrap green projects that could save residents and businesses hundreds of pounds in energy bills. That's a lot of money that you could be saving, but it's now been completely scrapped because of Conservative austerity. Many cash-strapped councils have reduced the size of their climate change teams through redundancies and hiring freezes, meaning ongoing net zero projects are faltering. Meanwhile, they're not putting in bids for funding for new schemes. Councils across the UK are struggling to balance their budgets following years of austerity, combined with rising costs in areas such as adult social care and homelessness. Many more councils are considering issuing Section 114 notices, with a recent survey by the Special Interest Group of Municipal Authorities finding that at least 26 local authorities could issue notices over the next 2 years. That's a huge number of councils potentially going into bankruptcy, which is absolutely wild. They're making mass redundancies and slashing spending on schemes that are deemed to quote-unquote not be essential, of which climate work is one of those areas affected. Ealing Council, which was forced to make massive cuts to avoid spending over budget last year, has warned residents it will be under financial strain for the long haul and has scrapped some climate projects, making redundancies in housing, failing to place a number of senior officers working in sustainability have left over the last year. So housing and sustainability, these are not just minor areas of like specific pet projects. These are basic things councils should be doing on things like housing and in continuing sustainability, which is why we just have the quote-unquote sticking plaster politic, to borrow a phrase from Keir Starmer, which hamstrings the ability of local authorities to continue providing their services in the way that you would expect your council tax money to be able to pay for. Last year, the council cancelled a project that was going to provide net zero retrofits to 24 flats and handed back £700,000 in funding it had received from the EU to partly fund the work. So literally, we were getting subsidy that we then can't use now because we can't afford the rest of the money to be able to pay for the project as well. That's absolutely wild. It had been estimated that the project, which was cancelled weeks before residents were expecting the work to begin, would have saved the social housing tenants, so the poorest people in the community, up to £300 a year on bills. Wow. Another scheme that is providing retrofits to more social housing tenants is underway, but has been massively delayed according to iSource. Hastings Borough Council, which has warned it is close to issuing a bankruptcy notice due to spiralling homelessness costs, again, another failure of housing policy and austerity politics, where we now don't have a proper homelessness plan because we're not building enough houses because of Conservative austerity and because of the failures on the regulation that we have around house building and failures on social housing expansion in this country, has caused homelessness to rise. The policingness of homelessness is expensive. The provision of homelessness care is also very expensive, and that is cutting into the funding that we could have on new housing and better housing for people to actually put the homeless people in to save money in the long run. Again, this short-termism of austerity politics, of neoliberal politics, of the state removing its role of being able to have to provide socially owned housing to people is causing even more costs down the line, because the private sector does not pick up the slack because it doesn't have any utility. It only has the profit motive, unlike the council, which wants to provide a service to residents, meaning we just get the worst service and we pay more for it. Everything that isn't to do with addressing the fact we're in bankruptcy territory has been put on hold for at least 6 months and probably longer. She said the council has failed to replace its climate action officer, who left to work elsewhere, and as a result has been underspending on its Solar for Business program, which installs solar panels on roofs of local businesses to reduce their bills and carbon footprint. For some local authorities, reduced capacity means they are struggling to bid for government funding to help them improve energy efficiency of public buildings and residents' homes. Nick Morford, a Green councillor within Northumberland Council, which issued a bankruptcy notice last year after identifying unlawful expenditure, said the council has had a very small retrofit team, despite the county being home to more than tens of thousands of homes with poor energy efficiency. So it's costing you money, it's costing you the environment, it's costing you the future extra money you're going to have to spend to deal with kicking this can down the road. And it's all due to government cuts in austerity funding that they've given out to councils from central Westminster. After 13 years of austerity, local councils just don't have the resources to devote for applying for funding for non-statutory duties such as climate change work. Even when what's left of the funding finally arrives at the local authority, many barriers to a successful project remain. If the work isn't delivered on time, the money is simply returned to the government and the local authority is back to square one, but with fewer resources to devote to their next attempt, which is incredibly sad just to think of just how much money is being taken out of your local authorities. The other consequence of this, it's not just that projects get cancelled, it's not that future investment stops, it's not just that your council tax bills increases, and it's not just that your service level that you have within the council decreases, all of the kind of basic things that you expect from councils in this country. On top of that, things that you technically own, right, that the public are supposed to own within that local authority, publicly owned local authority infrastructure and buildings and assets, these are all having to be sold off to pay for budget shortfalls because of austerity. It's like, this is your stuff that's getting sold off because the Conservatives have an ideological position of ensuring that the state and local authorities do nothing. They are forcing the sell-off through budget shortfalls, and it is a deliberate attempt to try and put money and assets into the private sector to drive up their value for their mates in the private sector. So the Guardian reports that £15 billion of public assets, that's things that you own, viewers, are sold by English councils since 2010 amid budget shortfalls. An estimated 75,000 assets, including community centres, libraries and swimming pools, have been sold, says a think tank in particular. This is suggested by the Institute for Public Policy Research. On an average of 6,000 council assets such as playing fields and whatever we discussed before, worth 1.2 billion have been sold each year in the past 13 years, through analysis from government data and statistics from a Freedom of Information request. By contrast, the research estimated just 2,500 assets came newly into community ownership during the same time. Again, this is breaking down the social contract. It's the opposite of the big society. It's Thatcherism writ large. There is no society, there are just individuals and families. And community ownership is against that dog-eat-dog and neoliberal Randian objectivist principle. And it's making our communities, and it's making our society, it's making our economy, and it's making our lives demonstrably worse. Beautiful town halls and such sold off, exactly. It's disgusting. And it's deliberate and ideological to do it. Cutting council budgets to do stealthy privatisation clever in a horrible way. Oh yeah, it's very clever. I'm not going to say that it's not clever. A change in the law in 2016 meant councils no longer had to buy new public assets with money made from selling them, and instead could use the money to make up for shortfalls in funding. The government is taking over the running of Birmingham Council since its bankruptcy. The IPPR is calling for fairer funding from national government to ensure that areas need investment get it, and participatory budgeting so that communities can decide how the money is spent in their area. Currently, only 1% of budgets are spent this way. It is also calling for common good property register to increase transparency of public asset ownership to help protect communities from continual losses. This work alongside support for communities to regain assets. This is good. IPPR are good eggs in talking about this, because again, this is just taking this is your assets. This is stuff that you own collectively in your local authority, being handed off and palmed off to the Conservative Party's mates in the desire to try and squeeze away at the public realm. It's revolting. They launched a research project on Wednesday called Parallel Lives, regionally rebalancing wealth, power and opportunity, which involves speaking to citizens of Hastings, Redcar and Stoke-on-Trent about the need to patch up holes in a threadbare social safety net. A Stoke resident who participated in the project said people in the town need to be empowered. I just think the people who live in it should be people who are given the opportunity to have a say on how to transform it and how to better it, and indeed what they should own and what they shouldn't own. It's all very well politicians from London having a say on our situation, but they haven't walked in our shoes. And that's, again, it's indicative of the centralisation of politics in London, within Westminster, and the death of localism, the end of localism. Everything is just big corporations, big investment firms taking over everything that we should be owning either collectively or locally. And it's so sad. Just seeing rows and rows of empty shops in your area, community resources like libraries and swimming pools and youth centres dying and becoming just another asset for private investment firms to own. And this is the result of neoliberal politics. This was the deliberate goal of the Cameron and Osborne administration, and hoping that the charitable sector would be able to pick that up, when it never did, because it didn't have the funding to be able to deal with a gigantic shortfall from actual state investment. Wirral's Town Hall and ancillary buildings have been closed since COVID. Anyone working for the council is either gone or working from home. Worse, the one-stop shop is permanently closed now, so no help with anything unless it's over the phone, and you'd be amazed how many of those stops and those halls get dropped. Exactly. Our local authorities are completely threadbare now. The birthplace of Robert Peel was demolished to make an Aldi. What are the Conservatives conserving at this point? Well, that's the irony of it. This is the opposite of conservation. Neoliberalism is the death of conservatism. It is the death of conservatism. And that's why people like Rory Stewart turn away. As much as I despise him for what he committed in his time in office, and reason why he only then turned heel when it came to Brexit. At least he understands that there needs to be some level of conservation, why he now regrets being part of austerity. Because neoliberalism conserves nothing. There can be no conservation when the only metric that matters is generating profit for shareholders. By learning the price of everything and the value of nothing, you degrade society. People want and deserve better than this. They want functioning public services to receive a fair share of investment and to restore pride in their places. Regional rebalancing must be reprioritised by central government through support of regional leaders who continue to champion the agenda locally. And this is really and truly why levelling up was such a failure, because it wasn't actually giving power to local communities. It wasn't putting things back in control of the people, which is what take back control was always perceived to mean. It's still the government chooses where the funding goes. The government chooses who gets the funding, how the funding gets spent. It's entirely centralised, and communities just have to apply for what the funding is and then Caesar's thumb point which way it should go, rather than having a council budget and then local political engagement, local council engagement, local ownership of where that money goes and who owns it. That's why levelling up was always doomed to fail, because it never was about levelling up. It was always just about short-term political game for Boris Johnson running for election. It's sad, because the actual stated motivation behind levelling up is something I really agree with, but the actual ideology behind it was never going to work. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.